Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Reading Corner. I'm your host Renee, and I am here for you every Wednesday reading stories in the public domain. This is the third upload for December, and it is the last one for December. I will be returning in January with my regular schedule, but I'm taking a break for the holidays and the New Year. But without further ado, let's get into it. We're currently reading Sweeny Todd and the String of Pearls, and we're on Chapter 19. Chapter 19, The Strange Odour at Old St. Dunstan's Church. About this time, and while the incidents of our most strange and eventful narrative were taking place, the pious frequenters of old St. Dunstan's Church began to perceive a strange and most abominable odour throughout that sacred edifice. It was in vain that old women who came to hear the sermons, although they were too deaf to catch a third part of them, brought smelling bottles and other means of stifling their noses. Still, that dreadful charnel house sort of smell would make itself most painfully and most disagreeably apparent. And the Reverend Joseph Stillingport, who was the regular preacher, smelt it in the pulpit, and had been seen to sneeze in the midst of a most pious discourse indeed, and to hold to his pious mouth a handkerchief, in which was some strong and pungent essence, for the purpose of trying to overcome the horrible effluvia. The organ blower and the organ player were both nearly stifled, for the horrible odour seemed to ascend to the upper part of the church, although those who sat in what may be called the pit by no means escaped it. The churchwardens looked at each other in their pews with contorted countenances, and were almost afraid to breathe. And the only person who did not complain bitterly of the dreadful odour in St. Dunstan's Church was an old woman who had been a pew-opener for many years, but then she had lost the faculties of her nose, which perhaps accounted satisfactorily for the circumstance. At length, however, the nuisance became so intolerable that the beadle, whose duty it was in the morning to open the church doors, used to come up to them with a massive key in one hand and a cloth soaked in vinegar in the other, just as the people used to do in the time of the Great Plague of London. And when he had opened the doors, he used to run over to the other side of the way. "Ah, Mr. Blunt," he used to say to the bookseller who lived opposite. "Ah, Mr. Blunt, I is obligated to cut over here, leastways till the atmospheric air is mixed up all along with the stinkifications which come from the church." By this it will be seen that the beadle was rather a learned man, and no doubt went to some mechanic's institution of those days, where he learned something of everything but what was calculated to be of some service to him. As might be supposed, from the fact that this sort of thing had gone on for a few months, it began to excite some attention, with a view to a remedy. For in the great city of London, a nuisance of any sort or description requires to become vulnerable by age before anyone thinks of removing it. And after that, it is quite clear that that becomes a good argument against removing it at all. But at last the churchwardens began to have a fear that some pestilential disease would be the result if they for any longer period of time put up with the horrible stench, and that they might be among its first victims. So they began to ask each other what could be done to obviate it. Probably, if this frightful stench, being suggestive as it was of all sorts of horrors, had been graciously pleased to confine itself to some poor locality, nothing would have been heard of it. But when it became actually offensive to a gentleman in a metropolitan pulpit, and when it began to make itself perceptible to the sleepy faculties of the churchwardens of St. Dunstan's Church in Fleet Street, so as to prevent them even from dozing through the afternoon sermon, it became a very serious matter indeed. But what was it? What could it be? And what was to be done to get rid of it? These were the anxious questions that were asked right and left as regarded the serious nuisance, without the fates graciously acceding any reply. But yet one thing seemed to be generally agreed, and that was that it did come, and must come, somehow or other, out of the vaults from beneath the church. But then, as the pious and hypocritical Mr. Batterwick, who lived opposite, said,
How could that be, when it was satisfactorily proved by the present books that nobody has been buried in the vaults for some time, and therefore it is a very odd thing that the dead people, after leaving off smelling and being disagreeable, should all of a sudden burst out again in that line, and be twice as bad as ever they were at first.
And on Wednesdays, sometimes too, when pious people were not satisfied with the Sunday's devotion, but began again in the middle of the week, that stench was positively horrific. Indeed, so bad was it that some of the congregation were forced to leave, and have been seen to slink into Bell Yard, where Lovett's pie shop was situated, and then and there solace themselves with a pork or a veal pie, in order that their mouths and noses should be full of a delightful and agreeable flavour, instead of one most peculiarly and decidedly the reverse. At last there was a confirmation to be held at St. Dunstan's church, and a great concourse of persons assembled, for a sermon was to be preached by the bishop after the confirmation, and a very great fuss indeed was to be made about really nobody knew exactly what. Preparations, as newspapers say, upon an extensive scale, and regardless of expense, were made for the purpose of adding lustre to the ceremony, and surprising the bishop, when he came, with a good idea that the people who attended St. Dunstan's church were somebodies, and really worth confirming. The confirmation was to take place at 12 o'clock, and the bells ushered in the morning with their most pious tones, for it was not every day that the authorities of St. Dunstan succeeded in catching a bishop, and when they did so, they were determined to make the most of him. And the numerous authorities, including churchwardens and even the very beadle, were in an uncommon fluster, and running about, and impeding each other, as authorities always do upon public occasions. But to those who only look to the surface of things, and who came to admire what was grand and magnificent in the preparations, the beadle certainly carried away the palm, for that functionary was attired in a completely new cocked hat and coat, and certainly looked very splendid and showy upon the occasion. Moreover, that beadle had been well and judiciously selected, and the parish authorities made no secret of it, when there was an election for beadle, that they threw all their influence into the scale of that candidate, who happened to be the biggest, and consequently who was calculated to wear the official costume with an air that no smaller man could have possibly aspired to, on any account. At 11:30 o'clock, the bishop made his gracious appearance, and was duly ushered into the vestry, where there was a comfortable fire, and on the table in which, likewise, were certain cold chickens and bottles of rare wines, for confirming a number of people, and preaching a sermon besides, was considered no joke, and might, for all they knew, be provocative of a great appetite in the bishop. And with what a bland and courtly air the bishop smiled as he ascended the steps of St. Dunstan's church. How affable he was to the church wardens, and he actually smiled upon a poor miserable charity boy, who, his eyes glaring wide open, and his muffin cap in his hand, was taking his first stare at a real live bishop. To be sure, the beadle knocked him down directly the bishop had passed, for having the presumption to look at such a great personage. But then that was to be expected fully and completely, and only proved that the proverb, which permits a cat to look at a king, is not equally applicable to charity boys and bishops. When the bishop got to the vestry, some very complimentary words were uttered to him by the usual officiating clergyman. But somehow or other the bland smile had left the lips of the great personage, and interrupting the vicar in the midst of a fine flowing speech, he said, "That's all very well, but what a terrible stink there is in here." The churchwardens gave a groan, for they had flattered themselves that perhaps the bishop would not notice the dreadful smell, or that, if he did, he would think it was accidental, and say nothing about it. But now, when he really did mention it, they found all their hopes scattering to the winds, and that it was necessary to say something. "Is this horrid charnel house sort of smell always here?" "I am afraid it is," said one of the churchwardens. "Afraid?" said the bishop. "Surely you know. You seem to me to have a nose." "Yes," said the churchwarden in great confusion. "I have that honour. and I have the pleasure of informing you, my lord bishop, I have the honour of informing you that this smell is always here." The bishop sniffed several times, and then he said, "It is very dreadful, and I hope that by the next time I come to St. Dunstan's, you will have the pleasure and the honour both of informing me that it is gone away." The churchwarden bowed and got into an extreme corner, saying to himself, "This is the bishop's last visit here, and I don't wonder at it, for as if out of pure spite the smell is 10 times worse than ever today." And so it was, for it seemed to come up through all the crevices of the flooring of the church, with a power and perseverance that was positively dreadful. "Isn't it dreadful? Did you ever know the smell in St. Dunstan's so bad before?" And everybody agreed that they never had known it anything like so bad, for that it was positively awful. And so indeed it was. The anxiety of the bishop to get away was quite manifest, and if he could have decently taken his departure without confirming anybody at all, there is no doubt that he would have willingly done so, and left all the congregation to die and be something or another. But this he could not do, but he could cut it short, and he did so. The people found themselves confirmed before they almost knew where they were, and the bishop would not go into the vestry again on any account, but hurried down the steps of the church and into his carriage with the greatest precipitation in the world, thus proving that holiness is no proof against a most abominable stench. As may be well supposed, after this, the subject assumed a much more serious aspect, and on the following day a solemn meeting was held of all the church authorities, at which it was determined that men should be employed to make a thorough and searching examination of the vaults of St. Dunstan's, with the view of discovering, if possible, from whence particularly the abominable stench emanated. And then it was decided that the stench was to be put down, and that the bishop was to be apprised it was put down, and that he might visit the church in perfect safety. Chapter 20. Sweeny Todd's Proceedings, consequent upon the departure of Tobais. We left the barber in his own shop, much wondering that Tobais had not responded to the call which he had made upon him, but yet scarcely believing it possible that he could have ventured upon the height of iniquity, which, we know, Tobais had really been guilty of. He paused for a few moments, and held up the light which he had procured, and gazed around him with inquiring eyes, for he could indeed scarcely believe it possible that Tobais had sufficiently cast off his dread of him, Sweeny Todd, to be enabled to achieve any act for his liberation. But when he saw that the lock of the parlour door was open, positive rage obtained precedence over every other feeling. "The villain!" he cried. "Has he dared really to consummate an act I thought he could not have dreamt of for a moment? Is it possible that he can have presumed so far as to have searched the house?" That Tobais, however, had presumed so far, the barber soon discovered, and when he went into his parlour and saw what had actually occurred, and that not only was every cupboard door broken open, but that likewise the door which led to the staircase and the upper part of the house had not escaped, he got perfectly furious, and it was some time before he could sufficiently calm himself to reflect upon the probable and possible amount of danger he might run in consequence of these proceedings. When he did, his active mind at once told him that there was not much to be dreaded immediately, for that most probably Tobais, still having the fear before his eyes of what he might do as regarded his mother, had actually run away, and, "in all likelihood," muttered the barber, "he has taken with him something which would allow me to fix upon him the stigma of robbery. But that I must see to." Having fastened the shop door securely, he took the light in his hands and ascended to the upper part of his house, that is to say, the first floor, where alone anything was to be found. He saw at once the open bureau, with all its glittering display of jewels, and as he gazed upon the heap, he muttered, "I have not so accurate a knowledge of what is here, as to be able to say if anything be extracted or not. But I know the amount of money, if I do not know the precise number of jewels which this bureau contains." He opened a small drawer, which had entirely escaped the scrutiny of Tobais, and proceeded to count a large number of guineas which were there. "These are correct," he said, when he had finished his examination. "These are correct, and he has touched none of them." He then opened another drawer, in which were a great many packets of silver, done up in paper. And these, likewise, he carefully counted, and was satisfied they were right. "It is strange," he said, "that he has taken nothing. But yet, perhaps, it is better that it should be so, inasmuch as it shows a wholesome fear of me. The slightest examination would have shown him these hoards of money, and since he has not made that slight examination, nor discovered any of them, it seems, to my mind, decisive upon the subject, that he has taken nothing, and perchance I shall discover him easier than I imagine." He repaired to the parlour again, and carefully divested himself of everything which had enabled him so successfully to impose upon John Mundle, and replaced them by his ordinary costume, after which he fastened up his house and sallied forth, taking his way direct to Mrs. Ragg's humble home, in the expectation that there he would hear something of Tobais, which would give him a clue where to search for him. For search for him he fully intended, but what were his precise intentions, perhaps he could hardly have told himself, until he actually found him. When he reached Mrs. Ragg's house and made his appearance abruptly before that lady, who seemed somehow or another to be always ironing, and always to drop the iron when anyone came in, very near their toes, he said, "Where did your son Tobais go after he left you tonight?"
"Lor, Mr. Todd, is it you? You are as good as a conjurer, sir, for he was here, but bless you, sir, I know no more where he is gone to than the man in the moon. He said he was going to sea, but I am sure I should not have thought it, that I should not."
"To sea? Then the probability is that he would go down to the docks, but surely not tonight. Do you expect him back here to sleep?"
"Well, sir, that's a very good thought of yours, and he may come back here to sleep for all I know to the contrary."
"But you do not know it for a fact?"
"He didn't say so, but he may come, you know, sir, for all that."
"Did he tell you his reason for leaving me?"
"Indeed, no, sir. He really did not, and he seemed to me to be a little bit out of his senses."
"Ah, Mrs. Ragg," said Sweeny Todd. "There you have it. From the first moment that he came into my service, I knew and felt confident that he was out of his senses. There was a strangeness of behavior about him, which soon convinced me of that fact, and I am only anxious about him, in order that some effort may be made to cure him of such a malady, for it is serious, and a dreadful one, and one which, unless taken in time, will be yet the death of Tobais." Those words were spoken with such solemn seriousness that they had a wonderful effect upon Mrs. Ragg, who, like most ignorant persons, began immediately to confirm that which she most dreaded.
"Oh, it's too true," she said. "It's too true. He did say some extraordinary things tonight, Mr. Todd, and he said he had something to tell, which was too horrid to speak of."
Now the idea, you know, Mr. Todd, of anybody having anything at all to tell and not telling it at once is quite singular." "It is, and I am sure that his conduct is such as you never would be guilty of, Mrs. Ragg. But hark, what's that?" "It's a knock, Mr. Todd." "Hush! Stop a moment. What if it be Tobais?" "Goodness gracious, it can't be him, for he would have come in at once." "No, I slipped the bolt of the door, because I wished to talk to you without observation. So it may be Tobais, you perceive, after all. But let me hide somewhere, so that I may hear what he says, and be able to judge how his mind is affected. I will not hesitate to do something for him, let it cost what it may." "Well, there is the cupboard, Mr. Todd. To be sure, there is some dirty saucepans and a frying pan in it, and of course it ain't the fit place to ask you to get into." "Never mind that. Never mind that. Only you be careful, for the sake of Tobias's very life, to keep secret that I am here." The knocking at the door increased each moment in vehemence, and scarcely had Sweeny Todd succeeded in getting into the cupboard along with Mrs. Ragg's pots and pans, and thoroughly concealed himself, when she opened the door, and sure enough, Tobais, heated, tired, and looking ghastly pale, staggered into the room. "Mother," he said, "I have taken a new thought, and I've come back to you." "Well, I thought you would, Tobais, and a very good thing it is that you have." "Listen to me. I thought of flying from England forever, and of never again setting foot upon its shores. I have altered that determination completely, and I feel now that it is my duty to do something else." "To do what, Tobais?" "To tell all I know, to make a clean breast, mother, and let the consequences be what they may, to let justice take its course." "What do you mean, Tobais?" "Mother, I have come to a conclusion that what I have to tell is of such vast importance, compared with any consequences that may arise from the petty robbery of the candlestick which you know of, that I ought not to hesitate a moment in revealing everything." "But, my dear Tobais, remember that it is a dreadful secret, and one that must be kept." "It cannot matter. It cannot matter. And besides, it is more than probable that by revealing what I actually know, and what is of such great magnitude, I may, mother, in a manner of speaking, perchance completely exonerate you from the consequences of that transaction. Besides, it was long ago, and the prosecutor may have mercy. But be all that how it may, and be the consequences what they may, I must, and I will tell what I know now." "But what is it, Tobais, that you know?" "Something too dreadful for me to utter to you alone. Go into the temple, mother, to some of the gentlemen's chambers who you attend to, and ask them to come to me, and listen to what I've got to say. They will be amply repaid for their trouble, for they will hear that which may, perhaps, save their own lives." "He is quite gone," thought Mrs. Ragg, "and Mr. Todd is correct. Poor Tobais is as mad as he can be." "Alas, alas, Tobais, why don't you try to reason yourself into a better state of mind? You don't know a bit what you're saying, any more than the man in the moon." "I know I am half mad, mother, but yet I know what I am saying well, so do not fancy that it is not to be relied upon. But go and fetch someone at once to listen to what I have to relate." "Perhaps," thought Mrs. Ragg, "if I were to pretend to humour him, it would be as well, and while I am gone, Mr. Todd can speak to him." This was a bright idea of Mrs. Ragg's, and she forthwith proceeded to carry it into execution, saying, "Well, my dear, if it must be, it must, and I will go. But I hope while I have gone, somebody will speak to you, and convince you that you ought to try to quiet yourself." These words Mrs. Wragge uttered aloud, for the special benefit of Sweeny Todd, who she considered would have been there to take the hint accordingly. It is needless to say he did hear them, and how far he profited by them, we shall quickly perceive. As for poor Tobais, he had not the remotest idea of the close proximity of his arch-enemy. If he had, he would quickly have left that spot where he ought well to conjecture so much danger awaited him. For although Sweeny Todd, under the circumstances, probably felt that he dared not take Tobias's life, still he might exchange something that could place it in his power to do so shortly, with the least personal danger to himself. The door closed after the retreating form of Mrs. Wragge, and as, considering the mission she was gone upon, it was very clear some minutes must elapse before she could return. Sweeny Todd did not feel that there was any very particular hurry in the transaction. "What shall I do?" he said to himself. "Shall I await his mother's coming again, and get her to aid me? Or shall I of myself adopt some means which will put an end to trouble on this boy's account?" Sweeny Todd was a man tolerably rapid in thought, and he contrived to make up his mind that the best plan, unquestionably, would be to lay hold of Tobais at once, and so prevent the possibility of any appeal to his mother becoming effective. Tobais, when his mother left the place, as he imagined, for the purpose of procuring someone to listen to what he considered to be Sweeny Todd's delinquencies, rested his face upon his hands, and gave himself up to painful and deep thought. He felt that he had arrived at quite a crisis in his history, and that the next few hours could not surely but be very important to him in their results. And so they were indeed, but not certainly exactly in the way that he had all along anticipated. For he thought of nothing but of the arrest and discomfiture of Todd, little expecting how close was his proximity to that formidable personage. "Surely," thought Tobais, "I shall, by disclosing all that I know about Todd, gain some consideration for my mother, and after all, she may not be prosecuted for the robbery of the candlestick. For how very trifling is that affair compared to the much more dreadful things which I more than suspect Sweeny Todd to be guilty of. He is, and must be, from all that I have seen and heard, a murderer, although how he disposes of his victims is involved in the most complete mystery, and is to me a matter past all human power of comprehension. I have no idea even upon that subject whatever." This, indeed, was a great mystery, for even admitting that Sweeny Todd was a murderer, and it must be allowed that as yet we have only circumstantial evidence of that fact, we can form no conclusion from such evidence as to how he perpetrated the deed, or how afterwards he disposed of the body of his victim. This great and principal difficulty in the way of committing murder with impunity, namely, the disposal of a corpse, certainly did not seem at all to have any effect upon Sweeny Todd, for if he made corpses, he had some means of getting rid of them with the most wonderful expedition as well as secrecy. "He is a murderer," thought Tobais. "I know he is, although I have never seen him do the deed, or seen any appearances in the shop of a deed of blood having been committed. Yet why is it that occasionally, when a better-dressed person than usual comes into the shop, that he sends me out on some errand to a distant part of town?" Tobais did not forget, too, that on more than one occasion he had come back quicker than he had been expected, and that he had caught Sweeny Todd in some little confusion, and seen the hat, the stick, or perhaps the umbrella of the last customer quietly waiting there, although the customer had gone. And even if the glaring improbability of a man leaving his hat behind him in a barber's shop was got over, why did he not come back for it? This was a circumstance which was entitled to all the weight which Tobais, during his mental cognitions, could give to it, and there could be but one possible explanation of a man not coming back for his hat, and that was that he had not the power to do so. "His house will be searched," thought Tobais, "and all the things which, of course, must have belonged to so many different people will be found, and then they will be identified, and he will be required to say how he came by them, which, I think, will be a difficult task indeed for Sweeny Todd to accomplish. What a relief it will be to me to be sure when he is hanged, as I think he is tolerably sure to be."
"What a relief,"
muttered Sweeny Todd as he slowly opened the cupboard door unseen by Tobais.
"What a relief it will be to me when this boy is in his grave, as he really will be soon, or else I have forgotten all my moral learning and turned chicken-hearted, neither of them very likely circumstances."
Chapter 21. The Misadventure of Tobais, the Madhouse on Peckham Rye. Sweeny Todd paused for a moment at the cupboard door before he made up his mind as to whether he should pounce upon poor Tobais at once or adopt a more creeping, cautious mode of operation. The latter course was by far the most congenial to his mind, and so he adopted it in a moment or so, and stole quietly from his place of concealment, and with so little noise that Tobais could not have the least suspicion that anyone was in the room but himself. Treading as if each step might involve some serious consequences, he thus at length got completely behind the chair on which Tobais was sitting, and stood with folded arms, and such a hideous smile upon his face that they together formed no inept representation of the Mephistopheles of the German drama. "I shall at length," murmured Tobais, "be free from my present dreadful state of mind by thus accusing Todd. He is a murderer, of that I have no doubt. It is but a duty of mine to stand forward as his accuser." Sweeny Todd stretched out his two brawny hands and clutched Tobais by the head, which he turned round till the boy could see him. And then he said, "Indeed, Tobais, and did it never strike you that Todd was not so easily to be overcome as you would wish him? Tobais?" The shock of this astonishing and sudden appearance of Sweeny Todd was so great that for a few moments Tobais was deprived of all power of speech or action, and with his head so strangely twisted as to seem to threaten the destruction of his neck, he glared in the triumphant and malignant countenance of his persecutor, as he would into that of the arch-enemy of all mankind, which probably he now began to think the barber really was. If one thing more than another was calculated to delight such a man as Todd, it certainly was to perceive what a dreadful effect his presence had upon Tobais, who remained for about a minute and a half in this state before he ventured upon uttering a shriek, which, however, when it did come, almost frightened Todd himself. It was one of those cries which can only come from a heart in its utmost agony, a cry which might have heralded the spirit to another world, and proclaimed, as it very nearly did, the destruction of the intellect forever. The barber staggered back a pace or two as he heard it, for it was too terrific even for him, but it was for a very brief period that it had that stunning effect upon him. And then, with a full consciousness of the danger to which it subjected him, he sprang upon poor Tobais as a tiger might be supposed to do upon a lamb, and clutched him by the throat, exclaiming, "Such another cry, and it is the last you ever live to utter, although it cover me with difficulties to escape the charge of killing you. Peace, I say, peace." This exhortation was quite needless, for Tobais could not have uttered a word, had he been ever so much inclined to do so. The barber held his throat with such an iron clutch as if it had been in a vice. "Villain," growled Todd, "villain. So, this is the way in which you have dared to disregard my injunctions. But no matter, no matter. You shall have plenty of leisure to reflect upon what you have done for yourself. Fool! To think that you could cope with me, Sweeny Todd! Ha!" He burst into a laugh so much more hideous than his ordinary efforts in that way, that had Tobais heard it, which he did not, for his head had drooped upon his breast, and he had become insensible. It would have terrified him almost as much as Sweeny Todd's sudden appearance had done. "So," muttered the barber, "he has fainted, has he? Dull child, that is all the better. For once in a way, Tobais, I will carry you, not to oblige you, but to oblige myself. By all that's damnable, it was a lively thought that brought me here tonight, or else I might, by the dawn of the morning, have had some very troublesome inquiries made of me." He took Tobais up as easily as if he had been an infant, and strode from the chambers with him, leaving Mrs. Ragg to draw whatever inference she chose from his absence, but feeling convinced that she was too much under his control to take any steps of a nature to give him the smallest amount of uneasiness. "The woman," he muttered to himself, "is a double-distilled ass, and can be made to believe anything, so that I have no fear whatever of her. I dare not kill Tobais, because it is necessary, in case of the matter being at any other period mentioned, that his mother shall be in a position to swear that she saw him after this night alive and well." The barber strode through the temple, carrying the boy, who seemed not at all in a hurry to recover from the nervous and partial state of suffocation into which he had fallen. As they passed through the gate opening into Fleet Street, the porter, who knew the barber well by sight, said, "Hulloa, Mr. Todd, is that you? Why, who are you carrying?" "Yes, it's I," said Todd, "and I am carrying my apprentice boy Tobais Ragg, poor fellow." "Poor fellow? Why, what's the matter with him?" "I can hardly tell you, but he seems to me, and to his mother, to have gone out of his senses. Good night to you. Good night. I'm looking for a coach." "Good night, Mr. Todd. I don't think you'll get one nearer than the market. What a kind thing now of him to carry the boy. It ain't every master would do that. But we must not judge of people by their looks, and even Sweeny Todd, though he has a face that one would not like to meet in a lonely place on a dark night, might be a kind-hearted man." Sweeny Todd walked rapidly down Fleet Street towards Old Fleet Market, which was then in all its glory, if that could be called glory, which consists in all sorts of filth, enough to produce a pestilence within the city of London. When there, he addressed a large bundle of great coats, in the middle of which was supposed to be a hackney coachman of the regular old school, and who was lounging over his vehicle, which was as long and lumbering as a city barge. "Jarvey," he said, "what will you take me to Peckham Rye for?" "Peckham Rye? You and the boy? There ain't any more of you waiting around the corner, is there? 'Cause you know that won't be fair." "No, no, no." "Well, don't be in a passion, master. I only asked, you know, so you need not be put out on about it. I will take you for 12 shillings, and that's what I call remarkably cheap, all things considered." "I'll give half the amount," said Sweeny Todd, "and you may consider yourself well paid." "Half, master? That is cutting it low. But howsoever, I suppose I must put up with it, and take you. Get in. I must try to make it up by some better fare out of somebody else." The barber paid no heed to these renewed remonstrances of the coachman, but got into the vehicle, carrying Tobais with him, apparently with great care and consideration. But when the coach door closed and no one was observing him, he flung him down among the straw that was at the bottom of the vehicle, and resting his immense feet upon him, he gave one of his disagreeable laughs as he said, "Well, I think I have you now, Master Tobais. Your troubles will soon be over. I am really very much afraid that you will die suddenly, and then there will be an end of you altogether, which will be a very sad thing. Although I don't think I shall go into mourning, because I have an opinion that only keeps alive the bitterness of regret, and that it's a great deal better done without Master Tobais." The hackney coach swung about from side to side, in the proper approved manner of hackney coaches in the olden times, when they used to be called bone shakers, and to be thought wonderful if they made a progress of 3 miles and a half an hour. This was the sort of vehicle, then, in which poor Tobais, still perfectly insensible, was rumbled over Blackfriars Bridge, and so on toward Peckham Rye, which Sweeny Todd had announced to be his place of destination. Going at the rate they did, it was nearly 2 hours before they arrived upon Peckham Rye, and anyone acquainted with that locality is well aware that there are 2 roads, the one to the left and the other to the right, both of which are pleasantly enough studded with villa residences. Sweeny Todd directed the coachman to take the road to the left, which he accordingly did, and they pursued it for a distance of about 1.5 miles. It must not be supposed that this pleasant district of country was then in the state it is now, as regards inhabitants or cultivation. On the contrary, it was rather a wild spot, on which now and then a serious robbery had been committed, and which had witnessed some of the exploits of those highwaymen, whose adventures in the present day, if one may judge from the public patronage they may receive, are viewed with such a great amount of interest. There was a lonely, large, rambling, old-looking house by the wayside on the left. A high wall surrounded it, which only allowed the topmost portion of it to be visible, and that presented great symptoms of decay, in the dilapidated character of the chimney-pots, and the general appearance of discomfort which pervaded it. There Sweeny Todd directed the coachman to stop, and when the vehicle, after swinging to and fro for several minutes, did indeed at last resolve itself into a state of repose, Sweeny Todd got out himself, and rang a bell, the handle of which hung invitingly at the gate. He had to wait several minutes before an answer was given to the summons, but at length a noise proceeded from within, as if several bars and bolts were being withdrawn, and presently the door was opened, and a huge, rough-looking man made his appearance on the threshold. "Well, what is it now?" he cried. "I have a patient for Mr. Fogg," said Sweeny Todd. "I want to see him immediately." "Oh, well, the more the merrier. It don't matter to me a bit. Have you got him with you, and is he tolerably quiet?" "It's a mere boy, and he is not violently mad, but very decidedly so as regards what he says." "Oh, that's it, is it? He can say what he likes here. It can make no difference in the world to us. Bring him in. Mr. Fogg is in his own room." "I know the way. You take charge of the lad, and I will go and speak to Mr. Fogg about him. But stay, give the coachman these 6 shillings, and discharge him." The doorkeeper of the lunatic asylum, for such it was, went out to obey the injunctions of Sweeny Todd, while that rascally individual himself walked along a wide passage to a door which was at the further extremity of it. Chapter 22. The Madhouse Cell. When the porter of the madhouse went out to the coach, his first impression was that the boy, who was said to be insane, was dead, for not even the jolting ride to Peckham had been sufficient to arouse him to a consciousness of how he was situated, and there he lay still at the bottom of the coach, alike insensible to joy or sorrow. "Is he dead?" said the man to the coachman. "How should I know?" was the reply. "He may be, he may not be. I want to know how long I am to wait here for my fare." "There is your money. Be off with you. I can see now that the boy is all right, for he breathes, although it's after an odd fashion that he does so. I should rather think he has had a knock on the head, or something of that kind." As he spoke, he conveyed Tobais within the building, and the coachman, since he had got his 6 shillings, feeling that he had no further interest in the matter, drove away at once, and paid no more attention to it whatever. When Sweeny Todd reached the door at the end of the passage, he tapped at it with his knuckles, and a voice cried, "Who knocks? Who knocks? Curses on you all, who knocks?" Sweeny Todd did not make any verbal reply to this polite request, but opening the door, he walked into the apartment, which is one that really deserves some description. It was a large room with a vaulted roof, and in the center was a superior oaken table, at which sat a man considerably advanced in years, as was proclaimed by his grizzled locks that graced the sides of his head, but whose Herculean frame and robust constitution had otherwise successfully resisted the assaults of time. A lamp swung from the ceiling, which had a shade over the top of it, so that it cast a tolerably bright glow upon the table below, which was covered with books and papers, as well as glasses and bottles of different kinds, which showed that the madhouse keeper was, at all events, as far as he himself was concerned, not at all indifferent to personal comfort. The walls, however, presented the most curious aspect, for they were hung with a variety of tools and implements, which would have puzzled anyone not initiated into the matter even to guess at their uses. These were, however, in point of fact, specimens of the different kinds of machinery which were used for the purpose of coercing the unhappy persons whose evil destiny made them members of that establishment. Those were what is called the good old times, when all sorts of abuses flourished in perfection, and when the unhappy insane were actually punished, as if they were guilty of some great offense. Yes, and worse than that were they punished, for a criminal who might have injustice done to him by any who were in authority over him could complain, and if he got hold of a person of higher power, his complaints might be listened to. But no one heeded what was said by the poor maniac, whose bitterest accusations of his keepers, let their conduct be what it might, was only listened to and set down as a further proof of his mental disorder. This was indeed a most awful and sad state of things, and to the disgrace of this country, it is a social evil allowed until very late years to continue in full force. Mr. Fogg, the madhouse keeper, fixed his keen eyes from beneath his shaggy brows upon Sweeny Todd as the latter entered his apartment, and then he said, "Mr. Todd, I think, unless my memory deceives me." "The same," said the barber, making a hideous face. "I believe I am not easily forgotten." "True," said Mr. Fogg, as he reached for a book, the edges of which were cut into a lot of little slips, on each of which was a capital letter in the order of the alphabet. "True, you are not easily forgotten, Mr. Todd." He then opened the book at the letter T, and read from it, "Mr. Sweeny Todd, Fleet Street, London, paid 1 year's keep and burial of Thomas Simpkins, aged 13, found dead in his bed after a residence in the asylum of 14 months and 4 days. I think, Mr. Todd, that was our last little transaction. What can I do now for you, sir?" "I am rather unfortunate," said Todd, "with my boys. I have another one here who has shown such decided symptoms of insanity that it becomes absolutely necessary to place him under your care." "Indeed. Does he rave?" "Why, yes, he does. And it's the most absurd nonsense in the world that he raves about. For to hear him, one would really think that instead of being one of the most humane of men, I was, in point of fact, an absolute murderer." "A murderer, Mr. Todd?" "Yes, a murderer. A murderer to all intents and purposes. Could anything be more absurd than such an accusation? I, that have the milk of human kindness flowing in every vein, and whose very appearance ought to be sufficient to convince anybody at once of my kindness of disposition." Sweeny Todd finished his speech by making such a hideous face that the mad-housekeeper could not for the life of him tell what to say to it. And then there came one of those short, disagreeable laughs which Todd would at times utter, and which somehow or other never appeared exactly to come from his mouth, but always made people look up at the walls and ceiling of the apartment, in which they were in great doubt as to whence the remarkable sound came. "For how long," said the mad-housekeeper, "do you think this malady will continue?" "I will pay," said Sweeny Todd, as he leaned over the table and looked in the face of his questioner. "I will pay for 12 months, but I don't think between you and I that the case will last anything like so long. I think he will die suddenly." "I shouldn't wonder if he did. Some of our patients do die very suddenly, and somehow or other we never know exactly how it happens. But it must be some sort of fit, for they are found dead in the morning in their beds, and then we bury them privately and quietly, without troubling anyone at all about it, which is decidedly the best way, because it saves a great annoyance to friends and relations, as well as prevents any extra expenses, which otherwise might be foolishly gone to." "You are wonderfully correct and considerate," said Todd, "and it's no more than what I expected from you, or what anyone might expect from a person of your great experience, knowledge, and acquirements. I must confess I am quite delighted to hear you talk in so elevated a strain." "Why," said Mr. Fogg, with a strange leer upon his face, "we are forced to make ourselves useful, like the rest of the community, and we could not expect people to send their mad friends and relatives here unless we took good care that their ends and views were answered by so doing. We make no remarks, and we ask no questions. Those are the principles upon which we have conducted business so successfully and so long. Those are the principles upon which we shall continue to conduct it, and to merit, we hope, the patronage of the British public." "Unquestionably. Most unquestionably." "You may as well introduce me to your patient at once, Mr. Todd, for I suppose by this time he has been brought into the house." "Certainly, certainly. I shall have great pleasure in showing him to you." The mad-housekeeper rose, and so did Mr. Todd, and the former, pointing to the bottles and glasses on the table, said, "When this business is settled, we can have a friendly glass together." To this proposition Sweeny Todd assented with a nod, and then they both proceeded to what was called a reception-room in the asylum, and where poor Tobais had been conveyed and laid upon a table. When he showed slight symptoms of recovering from the state of insensibility into which he had fallen, and a man was sluicing water on his face by the assistance of a hearth-broom occasionally dipped into a pailful of that fluid. "Quite young," said the mad-housekeeper, as he looked upon the pale and interesting face of Tobais. "Yes," said Sweeny Todd, "he is young. More's the pity. And of course we deeply regret his present situation." "Oh, of course. But see, he opens his eyes, and will speak directly." "Rave, you mean, rave," said Todd. "Don't call it speaking. It is not entitled to the name. Hush! Listen to him." Where am I?" said Tobais. "Where am I? Todd is a murderer! I denounce him!" "You hear? You hear?" said Todd. Mad indeed, said the keeper. "Oh, save me from him! Save me from him!" said Tobais, fixing his eyes upon Mr. Fogg. "Save me from him! It is my life he seeks, because I know his secrets. He's a murderer, and many a person comes into his shop who never leaves it again in life, if at all." "You hear him?" said Todd. "Was there ever anybody so mad?" "Desperately mad," said the keeper. "Come, come, young fellow, we shall be under the necessity of putting you in a strait waistcoat if you go on in that way. We must do it, for there is no help in such cases if we don't." Todd slunk back into the dark of the apartment so that he was not seen, and Tobais continued in an imploring tone. "I do not know who you are, sir, or where I am, but let me beg of you to cause the house of Sweeny Todd, the barber, in Fleet Street, near St. Dunstan's church, to be searched, and there you will find that he is a murderer. There are at least 100 hats, quantities of walking sticks, umbrellas, watches, and rings, all belonging to unfortunate persons who from time to time have met with their death through him." "How uncommonly mad," said Mr. Fogg. "No, no," said Tobais. "I am not mad. Why call me mad when the truth or falsehood of what I say can be ascertained so easily? Search his house, and if those things be not found there, say that I am mad, and have but dreamed of them. I do not know how he kills the people. That is a great mystery to me yet, but that he does kill them I can have no doubt." "Watson," cried the mad housekeeper. "Hilloa, here, Watson." "I am here, sir," said the man who had been dashing water upon poor Tobias's face. "You will take this lad, Watson, as he seems extremely feverish and unsettled. You will take him and shave his head, Watson, and put a strait waistcoat upon him, and let him be put in one of the dark, damp cells. We must be careful of him, and too much light encourages delirium and fever." "Oh, no, no!" cried Tobais. "What have I done that I should be subjected to such cruel treatment? What have I done that I should be placed in a cell? If this be a madhouse, I'm not mad. Oh, have mercy upon me! Have mercy upon me!" "You will give him nothing but bread and water, Watson, and the first symptoms of his recovery, which will produce better treatment, will be his exonerating his master from what he has said about him. For he must be mad so long as he continues to accuse such a gentleman as Mr. Todd of such things. Nobody but a madman or a mad boy would think of it." "Then," said Tobais, "I shall continue mad. For if it be madness to know and to aver that Sweeny Todd, the barber of Fleet Street, is a murderer, mad am I, for I know it and aver it. It is true. It is true." "Take him away, Watson, and do as I desired you. I begin to find that the boy is a very dangerous character, and more viciously mad than anybody we have had here for a considerable time." The man named Watson seized upon Tobais, who again uttered a shriek something similar to the one which had come from his lips when Sweeny Todd clutched hold of him in his mother's room. But they were used to such things in that madhouse, and cared little for them, so no one heeded the cry in the least. But poor Tobais was carried to the door, half maddened in reality by the horrors that surrounded him. Just as he was being conveyed out, Sweeny Todd stepped up to him, and putting his mouth close to his ear, he whispered, "Ha, Tobais, how do you feel now? Do you think Sweeny Todd will be hung, or will you die in this cell of a madhouse?" And that is where we are going to leave it for today. Crazy. What a spot to leave it for a couple of weeks. But I will be back with more episodes in January. Merry Christmas! Bye!